Welcome to you all. This is, I think, breaking records for us at the Academy. So it's great to do that in a virtual mode. And good afternoon if you're in the US. If you're in Rome, good evening. And it's wonderful to be able to capture both audiences in the United States and in Italy. It's one of the upsides of our virtual nature right now. So I'm Mark Robbins, president of the American Academy in Rome, and it is really wonderful to have so many of you online with us. This is the first public program of our 2020 season, and we'd like to thank the Helen Frankenthaler Foundation for their continued support of these programs, as well as to our staff here in New York, Mark McClary, and in Rome, High School Arts Director Elizabeth Rodini, and Mellon Professor Lynn Lancaster. We're pleased to have this first conversation with our new Academy Director, Avinoam Shalem. This is his inaugural talk, and Avinoam will start his tenure in January of 2021. So this is just a sneak peek at his kind of remarkable thinking. And the Academy will open January and early January again to receive this year's fellowship community. It's also an appropriate time to kick off the Academy's theme this year, which is the city. And in this year in which we've thought so much about proximity, what it means to be a community regarding the pandemic, but also through a renewed awareness of injustice and the rights of all citizens through Black Lives Matter, the streets have become, once again, active forums. And this is a history in American cities, which has always been contested space. The city continues to be a center of debate today, though they have always been places of cosmopolitan interaction, of difference, and vibrant innovation. In this sense, New York and Rome have something in common as port cities, in which the city's form and also its culture was shaped through commerce, the movement of people, and the interchange of ideas. This has often meant strangeness or unease. And our contemporary rhetoric in this country about cities underscores this unease, as well as the importance of historical perspective in rereading history. Today's brief talk, The City Objectified, looks at the city as an idea and a representation. It crystallizes the way we live together and the impact of our station point on our perspective. Avinoam Shalem's unique multidisciplinary lens coaxes deep meaning from this very layered subject. Professor Shalem is currently the Reggio Professor for the Arts of Islam in the Department of Art History and Archaeology at Columbia University. Avinoam specializes in the history of Islamic art with a strong emphasis on Arabic art in the Mediterranean Basin, the Near East, and the Levant, as well as in Spain, southern Italy, and Sicily. He also focuses on the art of the object, including secular and sacred aesthetics, including Jewish, Christian, and Islamic artistic interactions in the Mediterranean. Prior to his appointment at Columbia, Avinoam served as the professor of the history of the arts of Islam at the University of Munich, and has taught also at the universities of Tel Aviv, Edinburgh, Heidelberg, Bamberg, Lucerne, and the Nehru University in New Delhi. In addition, Avinoam has served as Andrew Mellon Senior Fellow at the Metropolitan Museum of Art guest scholar at the Getty Research Center, both in 2009 and 2019. He is a Max Planck Fellow at the Kunsthistorische Institute in Florence from 2007 to 15, and Robert Sterling Clark, Visiting Professor of Art History at Williams College in 2016 and 17. We're very pleased that Avinoam is coming to join us, but he is no stranger to the Academy. He was the 2016 Lester K. Little Scholar in Residence and worked with the American Academy in Rome as an advisor on the research seminar, Framing Medieval Mediterranean Art and Archaeology, as part of the Getty Foundation's Connecting Art Histories program. And he was also a key participant in the recent AAR conference, Islamic Art and Architecture in Italy, Between Tradition and Innovation. I'm truly delighted to bring Avinoam to this virtual podium today. I'm looking forward to his inaugural talk and to welcoming him in person to the American Academy in Rome. Avinoam.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, Mark, for these warming words of introducing me, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to open the academic year at the American Academy in Rome, the year of 2021. I want also to thank my direct colleagues at the Academy, Lynn, Elizabeth, and Anne, that are behind this meeting here, and of course Mark at the New York office for organizing and bringing it to this form. I don't have to tell you, and Mark already mentioned it, the COVID-19 inflicted on our life quite strongly. And the fact that we are opening the year, and I'm talking now mainly to the fellows hearing, that we are opening the year on Zoom is just another evidence how our life has changed since this epidemic started. The only thing that I can console myself, I must say, is the fact that last academic year, teaching at Columbia, we start in person and we move into Zoom. So let's hope that this year we are starting in Zoom, but we have the projection that we are going to keep on in January in person. I would like also to thank in Italian I miei colleghi e amici in Italia e particolarmente all'American Academy a Roma. Sono molto felice di avervi qui e se virtualmente e non vedo l'ora di vedervi presto in persona a gennaio e a Roma. Now, a few words a bit before I'm going to start with my lecture. I want to explain something. When Mark asked me to do this lecture, of course I thought, while working several years now on the art of the object, to do something about the way that the city began to be an object and how it was objectified. So to do something like that, I thought, you can't avoid dealing with the city of Rome, with all the vedutum that we have of this city and all the full material. And yet, and to some extent deliberately, I'm bypassing Rome now. I'm trying to discuss with it this subject with going to other cities, but of course, my goal is to open a discussion, to open idea for the whole year that will deal with the city, the year at the Academy, the American Academy in Rome. So let me start. I'm going now to share my screen, sorry. I hope it will work good and well. Let me just see. I'm going to go to the Safari. And to the dark room. That's it. I would like to open this lecture with a specific incident, an encounter that took place in the mid-50s in Ankara. It involved the German philosopher Joachim Ritter, that you see here, who during his time as a guest professor at the University of Istanbul between 1953 and 1955, while visiting the Ethnographic Museum in Ankara, tells us about his brief conversation with a young German scholar whom he accidentally met at the Belvedere terrace of this museum. Located on one of the slopes of Ankara's hills, the view that opens to the visitor's eyes from this museum terrace is panoramic. According to Ritter, the young scholar indifferently looked at the urban view of Ankara and said, "It is simply nothing unusual to see here, and not what you would not find in any European city of the same size." Ritter lamented the ignorant and ill-informed statement of this young scholar who was unable to understand the great project of modernity embedded in this urban landscape. Restriction of time prevent me from discussing in details Ritter's observations of this encounter, and especially his description, or better say reading, of the modern urban development of Ankara. Ritter interpreted this view in terms of passion, he called it Leidenschaft, between traditional past, which can be still be detected in the architecture of the scattered villages on the hills, and the modern aspiration of the newly designed center. While looking at this city from above, his sensible gaze notices the grand history of modernization with its complicated relationship to tradition and past. The urban development of Ankara with its old traditional buildings encroaching into the modern urban planning of the city presents, for Ritter, the excellent paragon for our complicated project of modernity. Ritter, like a prophet, saw in the 50s what the French philosopher Bruno Latour tells us circa 35 years later in his famous book, We Have Never Been Modern, published in 1991. Because modernism in Ankara did not overthrow the past. On the contrary, the past kept on growing into and within it. Nevertheless, seen from afar, the panoramic view of Ankara was transferred in 1 second into an image, into a picture. It was objectified, verdinglicht, as Ritter would have probably said. The Verdinglichung, namely the objectivation of a thing, is a particular aesthetic praxis which involved change of gaze. As Ritter argued in his famous essay from 1963, Landscape on the Function of the Aesthetic in the Modern Society, the Verdinglichung der Natur, the objectification of nature, is strongly linked to European histories of scaping of nature. He argued that the shaping of specific spaces in nature, namely Belvedere, which are usually located on summits of mountains and from which a panoramic vista can be gained, contributed to the making of nature into an object of our gaze, into an image. The metamorphosis evidently appears while tracing histories of Belvederes, but it can go back to mid-15th century. The Leon Battista Alberti phenomenological observations in the Pittura on the idea of a picture as a window, or even to the 14th century poetic epigraphy on the walls of the Nasrid Palace of Muhammad V in Alhambra, which emphasizes the presence and even animation of the view seen through the framed opening of this palace. Seeing a city from afar, and especially looking at it from above, promotes the best its objectification. Seen from a bird's eye view or from a nearby hill, the city is miniaturized and can be devoured and consumed like any commodity. This is probably the reason for our desire to climb to the top of the Empire State Building or any church tower to enjoy the commanding view from above. This view provides, with its sense of control, with a sense of control. Manhattan, for example, appears objectified. And like any tangible object, it gains its full form, contour, profile, and even its face, as we see here. We see the face of Manhattan. How illuminating are Pasolini's description of the city while shooting his film La forma della città. Standing on a hill, located just next to the city, and capturing the profile, as he said, of the whole city of Orte, Pasolini's camera slowly moves from right to left and then from left to right while grasping the whole city as if the city appears, as he says, through a vitrine in a showcase. His lens follows the city contour and detects its totality. Let's take a quick look at this a short moment where he's looking with his camera on the city of
C'è la solita bruma azzurro-bruna della grande pittura nordica rinascimentale. Se le inquadro vedo un totale ancora più perfetto di quello di prima. Cioè la forma della città è proprio nella sua perfezione massima. Ma se panoramico da sinistra a destra, quello che ti dicevo prima risulta in modo ancora molto più grave.
Now he goes slowly through the whole profile.
All'estrema destra finisce con uno stupendo acquedotto su quel terreno bruno e immediatamente attaccate all'acquedotto ci sono altre case moderne dall'aspetto non dico orribile ma estremamente mediocre, povero.
So by the end he actually went out of the contour of the city and found even its outskirts, for him disturbing buildings, the social building built outside the city of Orte. The wish to see the world as an image, and especially from above, and the desire of gaining panoramic views of the earth are traditionally recorded in early stories of mankind. The medieval legend about the magic mirror of Adam is a case in point. It is related that this mirror was given to Adam by God in order to provide Adam with a full vision of the earth and inform him of the whereabouts of his sons, who were scattered, of course, all over the continent. Thus, a panoramic world-encompassing view was given to Adam. Adam observed the world from above, as if from an imaginary tower, and was therefore able to discover distant region beyond the horizon. This legend was later mingled with the famous mirror of Alexander the Great, which was set for similar reasons on the top of the lighthouse, the Pharos of Alexandria, or with the magical cap of Sasanian King Khosrow. According to these stories, gaining a panoramic view demands the setting of the beholder on an elevated spot on a panoramic belvedere, and as the spatial depths is revealed and the horizon is discovered, the sense of being distant emerges. In this short lecture, I would like to speak about histories of objectifying cities, namely on the specific moment in which observers were able to reject the immersion that any city can work on her inhabitant, thus enabling them to see her as an intact unity rather than a fragmented body. These histories of objectifications are in fact histories of the aesthetic formation of distant gazes, which enable us to capture the city as a whole, as an object of visual desire. Moreover, attention is drawn to the implications involving these visual withdrawals. Likewise, attention is also given to the beholder's sensation of detachment, which on the one hand accelerates the beholder's desire to possess the city, and on the other hand suggests that the perception of being distant moves beyond its denotation of spatial stance and appears as related to the discovery of the historical time. When exactly, sorry, here. When exactly depictions of entire cities appear, although this query cannot be easily answered and much archaeological research is needed to establish this chronology, it seems plausible that images that capture the city as a whole were first linked to the emergence of walls around cities that defined the city as a unity, made clear separation between the city and its surrounding, and set the walls as the city visible outer borders, as if these are the city contours. The ancient Assyrian relief from the British Museum in London serves as a good example to show this notion. It is a carved gypsum alabaster, the so-called Musul marble, which is made into relief and to decorate one of the panels in the Northwest Palace of Nimrud, dating to the reign of Ashurbanipal II in the 9th century before the Common Era. The same notion of a unified walled city can be detected while reading the biblical story of the fall of Jericho. Here, the performative act of encircling Jericho 7 times to ensure the fall of its 7 walls accentuates, or rather brought into full consciousness, cognizant and corporal alike, the presence of the city as a whole, and stimulated its state as an object of conquest desires. It is no wonder that a long tradition dated from the medieval up to the modern times kept depicting the city of Jericho within a labyrinth, made up of the 7 protecting walls that encircled Jericho. The image of the labyrinth with its 7 large circles, in the center of which the city of Jericho appears, memorizes the legendary 7 walls built by the city's different rulers. But it also memorizes the corporal experience of encircling Jericho walls 7 times. The city was defined twice then, once by her protecting walls and twice by the performative act of circumscribing it. Although depictions of urban scenes seldom appear in the Greco-Roman period and very few depictions of entire view did survive, I think of Celano, for example. Yet, one might argue that the frequent appearance of personifications of cities, namely Tyche, in which female figures wearing mural crowns, like, for example, the ones presenting the cities of Rome, Constantinople, and Alexandria in the Louvre that you see here, might suggest that identities of cities were established as unique and individual, and that a broad perception of the city as an enclosed unity clearly existed. Mosaics in the region of Jordan and Palestine of today present to us the famous cities of the region embedded within a cartographic maps. The cities are usually depicted as protected by walls and are identified by specific architectural monument, mainly a church or a cathedral, associated with each of them. Like here we see the city of Philadelphia here. In several cases, like the famous mosaic from El Rassas that we see here in Jordan, the names appears too written above each image like captions. The Madaba map mosaic shows us here a detail of the city of Jerusalem, suggests that this type of urban images were most probably linked to the shaping of the geography of this region as a sacred space, namely exhibiting the Terra Sancta as the new geographic and imperial space governed by Christianity. In fact, maps, sacred and profane alike, formed the big arena in which images of cities were shaped and reshaped along centuries. This notion survives up to our day if one considers, for example, Google Earth map as a contemporary visual mode of shaping our perception today of images of cities. As far as maps are concerned, the city of Mecca might be a good example to discuss, set like the ideal city of Jerusalem at the navel of the world to which all orientation are directed. And you see here the map of the world, and here is the Kaaba of Mecca at the very center. Medieval depictions of Mecca usually reduce the image of this city into a sacred space, the Haram, and to the major holy sites that accompanied it. The Kaaba house with its venerated black stone is placed at the center, while the other holy sites are organized in a circle around it. The Haram itself, like a walled city, is defined by a square portico, and the minarets are set at its corners. According to literary sources, the earliest depiction of Mecca appears in the mosaic of the great Umayyad mosque in Damascus, dated approximately between 705 to 715. It was set above or next to the mihrab, the prayer niche, on the Qibla wall, the wall directed to Mecca. Unfortunately, this image did not survive. And no further images of Mecca in the early centuries of Islam came so far to our knowledge. It is plausible that images of Mecca were circulating most probably in illustrated pilgrimage certificates and talisman, and indeed the earliest circulating visual evidence appears around the 12th century in a pilgrimage certificate dated 1193. It should be mentioned, though, that a monumental depiction of Mecca, which was carved in low relief on a slab from Mosul and which is kept at the Museum of Baghdad, is dated to the end of the 11th century, between 1093 and 1095. Images of Mecca and also of Medina were shown as if from above and are usually flattened. But why? Why flattening? Sando Ferenczi, the Hungarian psychoanalyst, writes in 1933 in his book Thalassa, and I cite, this seeing things only in the flat, so to speak, had the result that in the natural sciences, one was satisfied, in general, with the conception of vital phenomena limited to single interpretation of data. End of citation. The schematic and flattened image of the Haram in Mecca secures its way of seeing. It sets the Haram component in a matrix that does not allow any change or any shift. And the Haram's specific building are presented to us in one standard way of seeing. Moreover, like any commercial image of food, which is usually flattened by being photographed from above, the city of Mecca appears as a tangible object of desire and leaves the impression of being so near and so reachable, as if the factual distance between us and the city is totally annulled. In addition, the combination between ground plan view and the elevations of edifices of the Haram promotes a particular cognitive visual exercise. It initiates in the mind of the beholder the wish to elevate the whole space as if the image could be transformed in our mind into a three-dimensional structure, into a sculptural city. And indeed, around 1400s, Verdinglichung of cities seems to take an additional impetus in particular scenes, in which cities were depicted as luxurious objects and symbolically donated as presents. Here, literally speaking, the city became a portable object, a container of urban life, and like a bowl or a cap is presented by its donor. See, for example, the late 14th century that we see here in one's in black and white's in color, the late 14th century image of an angel presenting the city of, perhaps, Damascus to the Prophet Muhammad, or the 15th century sculpture, and painting of Saint Blasius, the saint patron of the city of Dubrovnikov, safeguarding his city in his hand. But the copper gilt and enamel painted beaker from the Victoria and Albert Museum, datable around 1500, on the lid of which the city of perhaps Nuremberg appears, as if set on a hill, illustrates the zenith point of objectifying the city. The sculptural city of Nuremberg is a functioning object, a container clearly designed for human use. Yet a fundamental change in depicting Mecca appears in early 18th century, around 1720. From this moment on, a slanted view of Mecca is also adopted. Mecca is embedded within its panoramic landscape. The timelessness which characterizes the former bird's eye view of the treasury box-like image of Mecca, and I'm saying treasury box-like because Mecca looks almost like a relic container from above, was replaced by an image that sets Mecca within an accurate geography rather than within its timeless or eternal context. The emergence of a slanted view of Mecca was probably rooted in the global circulation of European printed images of cityscapes, namely vedute, and illustrated maps, especially of those cities located within the Ottoman Empire. These European images mirror the age of early colonial expansion through land and through sea. Probably they serve military aims too. See, for example, the famous detailed depiction of the city of Cairo by Matteo Pagano from 1549, or the bird's eye view of Damascus dated 1588, which appeared in Georg Braun and Franz Hogenberg, Civitates Orbis Terrarium, or the map of the Ottoman Empire made in 1626 by the English cartographer John Speed, which is probably the best example for the spread of a new image for the slanted view of cities. Here, you see the depiction of the Turkish Empire, but at the top in vignettes, you see actually the several images of the important city of the Ottoman Empire, which are depicted here, from Rhodos to Jerusalem to Istanbul, and even Hormuz. They appear as if offered on a plate, diagonally positioned as if presenting food to be consumed. Thus, the existence of a large oil painting of Mecca at the very early decades of the 18th century in Cairo comes as no surprise. This painting was probably acquired in Cairo in March 1712 by Johann Silverkrantz, who accompanied Michael Enneman, the envoy of the Swedish King Charles XII, in Istanbul, on his trip, the trip of Enneman, to Cairo. The painting was purchased by the University of Uppsala after the death of Enneman in 1717. The shift from looking from above to the slanted vision alters the notion of the sacred image. It replaces the holiness, which was once embedded in the sacred sites of the Haram, with Mecca's sacred geography. It shifts from the city as object, or I may even say the city as a relic, to the city in landscape. And the sacredness of Mecca resides now over the whole landscape of the Hijaz. The slanted gaze grants the pious beholder with a specific, yes, an individual point of view. Looking at this Uppsala painting, one gets the impression that the beholder is located on one of the hills surrounding the city of Mecca on a specific belvedere from which she or he can gaze at her or his subject or desire. Gazed at or even photographed, the city turned into an object of our visual appetite. It establishes its entire entity and identity as a unique object, and in most cases, sets it in a specific historical moment and space, rather than in eternal or ideal time. Concomitantly, and as Ritter notices, the Verdinglichung of our object of view brought with it a clear sense of separation, of a distance, a more or less melancholic sense of withdrawal, in which we, the beholders, are set apart, remote and detached from our object of observation. Now, back to Pasolini, La forma della città, and I'm not going back to the film, but I'm telling you, there is a moment that Pasolini is actually leaving this hill and start to walk toward Orte. He's going through the main gates and walk his way up the hill and enter the city of Orte. The moment he's inside, his mind is also transformed, and his detached gaze that was actually dominating his look at the city from outside is replaced by a feel of being immersed by the architecture of this city. And he starts to look at the streets and the houses and the churches of this city. And all of a sudden he is reminded, not of architecture, not of history, but of citizens. And the famous and the anonymous alike. Or maybe he is much more interested in the anonymity of people of the city, because as Pasolini even says, Pasolini recovers the city as the opera del popolo while walking through the streets. And he says, and I quote, "That's what people do not understand. Anyone you speak with would immediately agree that one should stand up for an artist's work, a monument, a church, a bell tower, a bridge, a ruin, whose historical value has been ascertained. But nobody realized we must also stand up for this anonymous, nameless past that belongs to the people." Now, moving back into the city regains its immersive power, its particular noise, actually. It formed by its specific streets, tempo, and its citizens, and if anonymous, and if invisible. And I think that that's the moment where I would like to end this lecture, because we are now we are leaving the detached gaze and entering into the city, and to start with a prelude of Calvino documentary film from 1974, Un uomo invisibile, in which, and I just want to show the prelude to this film before the film starts, because this will show us exactly what interests Calvino. Something else about the immersion of the city is being shown here. It is the nose of the city with its anonymous people, almost invisible, as we walk or walk in the city of Paris. He's interested in this noise that the city creates. Almost like a big clock that is moving, like a mechanical device that we get into.
Parigi, un giorno qualsiasi. Le strade, la gente, il tempo. Siamo venuti a scoprire Parigi con gli occhi di un grande scrittore italiano, che ci vive ma ne parla per la prima volta. Di solito gli scrittori italiani vivono a Roma, a Firenze o a Milano. Questo invece da 7 anni ha messo stabilmente casa a Parigi, nella periferia sud della città.
Well, I think this ends well the way into the city. We ended up with this invisible Calvino on the outskirts of Paris, but we enter back into the city and we gain back the power, the immersive power that the city has upon us. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, Avinoam. Hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lynn Lancaster. I'm the Mellon Professor in charge of the humanities. And we're opening it up for questions, but we have almost 400 people here. So we will ask you to use the chat box, and I will try to negotiate that as best I can. So I'll just, while people think of what their questions might be and get them written, I will start off with a question of my own. In some of the images that you showed, they had a very sort of geometric quality to it. And I wonder if you have seen any connections with sort of the development of the design of utopian cities. And I'm thinking like of Palma Nova, which is in northern Italy. I mean, do you see any connection with these sort of visual movements?
Yeah, I mean, if we think in this direction, so I would say that the ideal city is actually the city that is a geometric one, as a form, like a diamond, like Jerusalem, heavenly Jerusalem as an ideal city. If you take a look at the images of Jerusalem in medieval time, you will see that it is either a full circular city divided into usually 4 quarters of the city. So you have a kind of a geometrical image of a disc divided into 4. Or sometimes even in other depiction, it would be square like a diamond. It's actually created the idea of the city as a geometrical precious stone, cut to the beauty of the precious stone. So I think that if we think of this, the idea of the ideal city and the Jerusalem as ideal city, you can then go into the building of ideal city, and you think of Palma Nova, which is star-like form, I assume.
So we have another question. Let's see. Can you say something more about how the history of representation of a sacred city or a site of pilgrimage like Mecca or Jerusalem or Rome might be distinct from the representation of other cities like Damascus or Cairo, and thus the extent to which the context and intended use of a particular image impacted its form?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make a clear separation between, you know, sacred geography, as if saying that, say, Jerusalem and Mecca is one, and the other city, or Rome, and then the other city like Cairo is not sacred, or Damascus, or even Aleppo. I mean, sacred spaces might be also there, and they might also form and inflict on the image of the city. But it is interesting to see the flattening mode of depiction that we saw so clearly with Mecca, and we can see it also with Jerusalem, for example, that creates a clear object of desire, but at the same time a clear object that you can see clearly, like in a relic box, the specific relics that are set inside, so you know where you are going to, you know what you are going to see and to experience. But I cannot make a full, I think it would be too sharp to create a full distinction between the sacred and not the sacred. And especially even with Mecca, the slanted view that came by the beginning of the 18th century is living side by side by the view from above that we have seen. So it keeps both gazes at the same time. And I wonder if that might suggest also something about a specific way of looking at city and suggesting new idea of sacredness in a specific moment in time.
Thank
I
you.
hope that I was clear. I was trying to say that sacredness has also its time. It has its chronological time.
So I have one that's, this is just a comment, but I'll read it out. This is from David Marinick. The objective view of the city is, in a way, the architect's view. Those who shape the city have to see it at some level as an object. And then we have a question from Anne Kolaski-Ostro. I'm wondering what Avinoam thinks of Fellini's film Roma as an image of the city objectified.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many films that I could bring here, and it reminded me of a seminar that I did some years ago with Suzanne Babai on depiction of cities in films. There are many films that we can learn from them on the objectification actually of city, and even, you know, lately I was reading even the description of Walter Benjamin in Marseille while taking the decision to try some hashish. In that moment, I mean, he's first afraid of going to the city with being, you know, under the hashish influence. So he's in his hotel, he stays in his hotel. But after 2 hours that he thinks that the hashish does not work on him, he goes out. But then it started. And then he is already describing the city. Now I'm saying that because he's getting a very sharp eye of the city of Marseille. And it's, first of all, he feels that the city is actually a port city. It has a kind of a nerve that is the main street that takes into the port, where on this street, he feels that the whole energy of the city is going from the city out to the port and out to the world, and from the world into the city. So it's like a blood vein that he all of a sudden realized in the main street of Marseille. But he is also, after having twice dinner at the same night, because he's very hungry, that he is looking even at the people of Marseille. So the city, as I said, by the end, it's not only the architect's eye, it's also the city and its citizen that make the city to be the city. Well, I don't have to tell more. It's not only Fellini, it could be Woody Allen at the same time in his Manhattan, for example.
Okay, thank you. So a question from Nasser Rabat. So you seem to transcend the division between East and West. Are you deliberately indicating that you believe that thinking about and representing the city crosses cultural barriers, or that the two traditions share similar cultural fountainhead?
Yeah, a great question. I mean, I said that it seems to me that some veduten that were made in Europe started to infiltrate into other spaces, cultural spaces, like the space of the Ottoman Empire, and started to create a new gaze. But I don't think, you know, and that's why I said the painting that was bought in Cairo is coming as no surprise for me, because ideas are moving and ideas are being taken from one place to another. So even if I started with a European vedute, and I could even go back maybe to Altdorfer and perspective view in painting, I think that what was happening is the moment things like a print like that would reach the Ottoman Empire, and new ideas will develop. And I wonder if we haven't found yet the earliest, you know, veduten and maps, record maps, or in Ottoman archive that will give us more information on that. I brought what I thought that will be illustrative for this lecture, but I'm sure there is much to dig in this area and to find more. Thank you.
We have another question from Dan Berman. Rome was, of course, unwalled for many centuries. After the city had outgrown the Servian walls and the Aurelianic walls were not yet built, do you think that affected depictions of Rome through those centuries or beyond?
Beyond my knowledge. Beyond
Okay.
my knowledge.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, I cannot answer a specific question as that. Yeah.
Okay. Elise Schweitzer asks, Rebecca Solnit writes about distance in cities and atmospheric perspective in her essay, Blue is the Color of Desire, that the atmospheric color shift of blue indicates desire in Renaissance painting. Does this appear outside of European painting?
It's interesting, you know, to take the blue as a desire. White could be no less desired when we read, for example, Titus Burckhardt describing Fez, or even Canetti, Elias Canetti in Marrakesh. But definitely, I mean, I think that I put this idea of a desire. There is the detachment brings actually or enhances also the desire to get to the city. But we should not forget we are all voyeurs. We are all voyeurs here in this looking at the city. So yes, desire is definitely also there.
Let's see what we have. From Murali Ramaswamy, doesn't then a geometrically defined ideal city lend itself to become naturally objectified? Cities that evolve without an externally imposed design are naturally less objectifiable and more immersive. Would you agree?
Interesting. Thank you for bringing this point. I do agree. Yeah, I do agree that there is something about the geometrical design that creates out of it a clear object of desire, a clear object. I wonder if I'm trying at the same moment to go against my thinking and to think of an immersive, chaotic object. If I'll come to it, I will bring it later.
So we're getting on towards 7. So I'll do one last one that sort of brings us back around to the modern period. This is from Susan Jones. And she says, lovely talk. I wonder if you could riff a bit on what it was like to prepare this research and lecture during a time that the pandemic descended upon us. Certainly the relationships between citizens and cities changed fundamentally, even if temporally limited. As an additional question, your research has certainly encountered cities and their representation during pandemics. Can you comment?
Yeah, wonderful question and to the point. I must say I totally have an empathy, so to speak, with this kind of question, because the first reaction of people during pandemic, and I don't have to speak about New York, where I experienced the COVID-19 shutdown, and I could see how Manhattan is being emptied every day, and people are leaving. The building where I lived was all of a sudden only with 4 or 5 families. So the city is actually deserted or is actually left, and people going outside the city. And even now, you know, I'm now not in New York, but I'm on the hills of Florence, not far away from the house of Boccaccio. So we are set outside the city and we can see the city from outside. So definitely the pandemic and the going out of the city creates, of course, at the same time, not only the knowledge of the outskirts of the city, but it creates also another view on the city, which you have while you are being outside. I must also add to it that I was, you know, like all of us, we were all looking at the deserted cities during the pandemic. There were so many images on the internet to see how Milan, for example, became to be almost like the ideal city of the Renaissance moment, like Fra Carnevale, you know, image of an ideal city. The deserted city through the pandemic created another image to our cities that we cannot forget. In the first place, we might call it ghost cities because there is something uncanny about it. Like in the Renaissance painting of a deserted cities that we know from the ideal Renaissance painting of the city of Urbino, for example. So there is also the image of the city, I think, was much developed during the pandemic through the idea of the uncanniness of the void that was created in the city during the pandemic. Thank you for bringing these points on images of city in our time. I hope that.
Hey, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to our president, Mark Robbins, now for closing. You're muted, Mark. Mark.
Go.
There you go.
There's always a little bit of a lag. Thank you so much, Avinoam. Thank you, Lynn, for leading the questions. I think the sign of a good talk is always the number of sparks that it throws off. And I know this will be just the first of many, many conversations we have about the city. Thinking about the physical properties of Rome, where we are on the Academy, our fantastic veduta from high at the Acqua Paola, the way we see the city objectified on our own at the American Academy in Rome in so many ways, and then immerse ourselves. So this notion of going out into the city of Rome is something to which we're devoted and is really part of our lives as an institution. So thank you so much for leading off the year. And we're looking forward all to our walks and talks in Rome, the immersion and the objectification through which we learn very different things. Thank you again for all for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you in our next conversations this fall. The first of these will be shortly October 5th, Notes from America with the photographer Kathy Opie. And I'll be in discussion with Kathy Opie, who will be a resident at the American Academy in Rome. On Monday, November 2nd, conversation, the Pergamon Panorama in Berlin, where tradition and innovation converge, with Andreas Scholl and Lynn Lancaster as the impresario for this conversation. And we will have our last conversation on November 16th with recent Academy resident, the film critic A.O. Scott, in conversation with filmmaker and recent fellow Garrett Bradley. So please join us for all of these public events. We welcome your voice and your attention. And thank you again to Avinoam, and thank you all for joining us. Have a good day. Bye-bye.